my first association with it is Bach's Jesu joy of man's desiring, right? Like religious ecstatic joy. And my second association with it is uh I think it's Ren and Stimpy. Happy, happy, joy, joy, happy, happy, joy, joy, which
Okay.
which is like the polar opposite. Howdy, Brian.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well, thanks. How are you?
Oh, real good.
Good. Um, I was speaking with somebody today who is putting together a book that goes into different perspectives on joy. And the way he explained it to me, he said he got a number of people across the ideological spectrum to write essays about I think some version of finding joy in difficult times, in distressing times. And um and the word joy is interesting to me. I don't mean etymologically, although that also could be interesting. I don't know, but because I think of it as like my first association with it is Bach's Jesu joy of man's desiring, right? Like religious ecstatic joy. And my second association with it is uh I think it's Ren and Stimpy. Happy, happy, joy, joy, happy, happy, joy, joy, which
Okay.
which is like the polar opposite. um
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't didn't do a lot of Ren and Stimpy myself. That
I can't say I did a lot, but that song stuck. I think I was maybe I don't know, late teenager, and it was like right up there with Beavis and Butthead as far as
right, right.
sticky content. Um, so yeah, I think joy covers a spectrum. I'm interested in the idea that it has different implications when viewed f- through different ideological lenses. Like I'm not sure quite what that means, and I didn't have a chance to unpack that with this person. But I thought I would raise the topic. I don't think we've talked about joy specifically, and I'm curious, like, what associations you have with it. And I'm also curious about it as a as a topic of like transcendence, or of the ego, right, or of the individual versus of joining. Um, so
Right.
what you got?
Well, if I was looking for a philological thread, I think I'd be looking at alegria, um, would be the Latin Spanish root, I think. Um, and I guess it's one of those things uh that a word that everybody knows and everybody uses as if everyone else knows it, but in fact, everybody else's definition could be quite different. Um, so I suppose we could divide the joys into maybe your small j joys, which are determined or dependent on your seat around the table, where your foot was nailed down, so to speak. And then maybe you would reserve your capital J joys for something in the religious transcendent, um, sort of a thing. Uh, and I suppose you have your positive joys. That is, that first spoonful of chocolate mousse or whatever your chocolate mousse is. And then you have, the relief, for example, of getting a splinter pulled out. Sort of like a negative joy, the joy of not hitting yourself on the head with a hammer anymore. Uh, and what that sort of points out is that, there's these things that happen with our perceptive faculties. And they usually show this in painting where you take one color and you put it in one setting and it shows up as a dark, and you take the same color and you put it in a different setting and it doesn't even look like the same color, and the eye and the brain will be tricked into thinking it's an entirely different color just because it's sitting in a different setting. So joy to somebody in a palace with golden toilet seats, and joy to somebody in a packed prison cell in some forgotten, godforsaken place, those might look really different. And so that, uh, uh, I suppose there's that, and we could say that some of that is in the hardware, and uh, some of that is in the interpretive function. And how much of it is like your eyes getting set to darkness, and then when you come out into the bright lights, your setting is sort of not adapted yet to the new environment. So, um, and then how much of it is interpretive? How much lives in our head about what to be joyful about and what not to be joyful about?
Mhm.
Um, are we joyful of the things that have happened already, or are we joyful over futures that we foresee? Those two elements might be quite different based on how that joy's relationship to time, in other words.
Yeah, I
So
have this, association with joy also that it's like something that a child or a fool experiences, or is part of transcendence, but an adult, uh, human, um, that wouldn't be commonly having an experience of joy, and which is odd. I think, I don't know where that association comes from for
well,
me.
there's a concept that I have that came from Chinese medicine, and it got translated as overjoy, which is interesting because we have the common usage of the term, "Oh, I was just overjoyed." And we don't think of it as something out of balance. But in this setting, and I think it's usually related to the heart, uh, this idea of overjoy is closer to what we might think of as like slap happy, uh, or giddy, uh, a joy that somehow is untethered from uh, here and now. And that would be distinct. Maybe that would be joy in italics if we've already used the small j and the large j. Um, Something slanted about that kind of joy.
Yeah. I mean, can you remember the last time you experienced joy?
Well, it depends on how we're going to define it, um, and whether we're talking about the capital J or the small j. I try to keep my expectations for the small J's relatively limited. That's how I made it this far. Uh, and as far as the capital J joys, I think for me, they're largely in the past, and they're of a nature that knowing that they are is metaphysically as useful as experiencing them in the present is.
Mhm.
And maybe they serve slightly different purposes in the past and in the present, but it's like once you know that that's there, then it changes. Your map is rewritten from that point on.
Yeah, like the nude playing cards.
Yeah, yeah, and so yeah, that perspective is you can't put that rabbit back in the bag or that cat back in the bag. It's like, well, you've seen it now. You see everything through that cognitive lens, maybe is the thing, um, or maybe it's more of a codec function, but, um
What's a sorry, I'm not familiar, or I've
well, the codec
forgotten.
functions are interpretive and the lens functions are perceptive,
Okay.
is generally thought. And this is, like there's as we've said before, there's the self that creates kind of an inside and an outside, and that inside and outside means that now there's a traffic between the inside and the outside. And so we have the means wherein that trafficking happens, which is direct sensing or a sort of a second order of sensing, that is, things that are derivative from the things sensed, patterns and, insights, if you will. And then you have the ways that you process that once the data has made it inside. You have the decision making faculty that applies to it, and different structures that not when we say decision making, what we're really saying is adding an evaluative assessment. We're saying good, 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 bad, 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 and we're sort of putting it on the shelf based on where we stack it. And humans do that different ways. And so those are what they call the codec functions,
Got it.
evaluative, interpretive functions. That's uh, when Lao Tzu says, quoting the ancients, "What we value and what we fear are within ourself." Those are the codec functions. What we value, positive; what we fear, not positive. And so that idea that's within
Because they're both
ourself,
interpretive.
they're
Values
interpretive
and
and
fears.
they're idiospecific to our seat at the table. Yeah, like that. So now joy, if I want to think capital J joy, I'm thinking more, cosmically. And so then I'm not thinking about it as a, I'm not thinking about it propositionally. I'm thinking about it dispositionally, which is to say, as much as a nervous system event as a thought content meaning payload. In fact, that thought meaning payload may only come after the fact. In fact, that may be part of that noetic quality that William James talks about in the varieties of religious experience. That is an experience that carries its authority sort of in the experience itself, as opposed to its authority being based on reason from known and accepted principles. This is more of a direct knowing. And so um so yeah, whether joy lives in that place or joy lives propositionally, uh they're not entirely disconnected, but they're probably rooted differently. um you know, maybe whether it's introverted or extroverted, since we've already been on a kind of a Jungian direction, that is verted, turned inward or turned outward,
Mhm.
you know. Uh,
Yeah, I guess I'm getting a little hung up too on definitions. Like, I'm not sure how we differentiate joy, happiness, exuberance, and I'm wondering if, like, by the opposites also. And part of the problem here is, like, trying to make a map of the emotional experience is kind of fraught, right? Like, I'm not, like you said earlier, we likely don't mean the same thing when we say joy, and there are probably various types of joy. And um like, I was trying to think of the last time I experienced joy, lowercase or capital. And like there are times when, like, I walk outside and the sun is shining and the birds are singing and like it just kind of I have this flash of like, oh, I'm fortunate to be alive. This feels good. Um, that might be joy. I don't know.
or peacefulness.
Yeah, yeah, or connection. Like I think
Mhm.
when we're connected to the experience of living, it generally feels good or authentic. And when we're kind of disconnected from ourselves and from the experience, it's easy to just get untethered.
Right.
Um,
But see, then
so
we can take the joystick and push it all the way over in the other direction. See what I did there?
I do.
Uh, and that would be maybe more in the ecstasy direction.
Hmm.
Sitting in the garden is sort of the calm side of the joy spectrum. All the way other on the other sense, curiously, we recognize it as ecstasy. Uh, but that's a good one as far as looking at the etymology. Ek, like the exit in the theater, is the way out, right? So ecstasis from the Greek, standing out, like as in standing outside of. The
Well, I would have
idea
thought of
being that
stasis as like the state of things, exiting the state
standing,
of things. Uh-huh.
yeah, uh, 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 yeah, more like the stance idea, yeah,
Hmm.
and but the idea, the experience of standing outside of oneself. And what they were talking about, I think, was often applied to theater, where we have not just the suspension of disbelief, but a sort of a displacement so that if you're really, and I think with kids we can really see it, if they're really engrossed, they're in it. They're not in a chair in a theater. If you jumped when the skeleton came around the corner, you had, for all biological reasons, lost track of the fact that you're in the chair in the theater and not in the hallway with the stupid person you were telling to stay in the car a few minutes earlier. And that standing outside of ourselves becomes a quality then that gets associated with ecstasy. And so we might ask the question, if we're not standing inside ourselves any longer, where are the different places we might be standing? Um, if we're going to capitalize the joy, I think we need to be standing someplace pretty special. If we're going to keep the J small, we could just be, digging into a nice prime rib. Um, and there might be some standing outside of ourselves in that experience.
Mm.
I can remember some pretty transcendent sushi moments.
Hmm.
Some of that uni, oh baby.
I never acquired that taste, but sushi, yes. Uni, not yet. Um,
Uh-huh.
but I wouldn't have thought of that as transcendent. But it all kind of makes me curious about whether having these experiences of joy, ecstasy, transcendent are important. Something uh, that the superior man, say, might seek, or is this purely a factor of good fortune, to kind of have these experiences along the way? And I'll caveat that with like I think it's it's dangerous to seek that in a way, right? I mean, I'm thinking of like adrenaline junkies who keep needing to do extreme things, presumably because of the ecstasy they experience, like when they jump out of a plane or zip line across the alligator pit or whatever it is that they do. Um, I I think there's a blurry line between kind of collecting experiences I think what I've said on the show before is I think that's like a fundamentally materialistic way of going about things versus like the joy or ecstasy that might result from uh, letting oneself fully experience being alive um, on this sunny morning with the birds singing and um, yeah, I'm not sure how to define that exactly. I don't know if you have any thoughts about it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this is one that we could probably come up with a personality typing system based on where people find their bliss, to
Mhm.
borrow the popular um,
Well,
vernacular.
I think I'm asking like that question was in there, but maybe more important is this experience important to have? And
Uh,
and I'm thinking about
well,
like in dark times, in distressing times, in like
well, that's
is
where we have to drill into the detail of what exact experience are we talking about,
Mhm.
and that those joy circuitry. Uh, maybe we're looking for larger and larger. There's this idea that the counterfeit coin proves the existence of true coin somewhere, or this idea that what most of human life is this Atman project, as Ken Wilber's first book talked about. We want union with the highest elements of the universe, God, the universe, and everything. But we take a lot of wooden nickels. We follow a lot of bum steers. So we're willing to take things that are smaller versions of what we really want. We settle. So that's how we end up with intoxicants. And the argument might be that the person who's using intoxicants is really looking for a permanent new higher disposition, but they've been tricked by this side path through momentary flashes of something that doesn't have any stickum, so to speak. Um,
Mhm.
so that's where I would say that there are the experiences that are ecstatic, that are cosmic, are not things that you need to keep re-experiencing. Maybe there's a level where your yoga gets to where you're more or less hanging out there all the time. But a lot of these things, I think that once you've seen, you've seen. And, the- so, I guess I feel like some of these experiences are ways that they're self verifications that this is the path. They're the little bell ringing along the way that's a reinforcement because the glimpse that comes from it, the ecstatic glimpse, reveals itself in that noetic quality. So it's like, when I was a kid, I climbed a lot of Adirondack mountains and I walked on the Appalachian Trail, and there used to be regular trail blazes. And, the blaze is just a little mark on a tree, or sometimes it's a little metal tag that's got a color. And, and it's just a thing that tells you, you're on the right path.
Mhm.
And so I think these experiences, the correct ones are blazes along the pathway. But there are side paths, and there are down south they have this one of the folk tales is of a chula chakri. Did you hear about the chula chakri?
No, but so it's hanging out at the farm?
The chula chakri is out in the forest when you're
Oh.
trying to go from one place to another. They'll show up and they'll tell you, "Oh, hey, there's a shortcut over here. It'll be much faster."
I have encountered them.
But if you check, one of their feet is on backwards. It's pointing the other way, not
Excellent.
right. Yeah. And take my word for it, you don't want their shortcut. Okay. So and even Lao Tzu says, and various Buddhist teachers have said the way is straight, but people love the side paths, you know, and so there's something to be said for that, and to sort of understand these. And this is where we've talked about before: attraction, aversion, and bewilderment. Those are all ways that we lose the path, and so these blazes are not to be made more of than just that. It just means keep going. It doesn't mean now you're God's gift to all of reality.
Well,
You know?
if we pull the joystick back some and like kind of tamp down our exuberance and ecstasy, what about cultivating a sense of well-being and um, trying to experience well-being on a regular basis? Uh, eh, like, for example, I would think um, that a that being able to access a sense of well-being makes it easier to access a sense of well-being. And that, for one thing, makes it easier to get your work done. And for another, makes it easier to have difficult conversations without getting thrown in who knows what direction. And it makes it easier to do things you might prefer not to do. So I mean, I think that's on the continuum of joy and ecstasy, but may maybe this is another definitional issue.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that uh, any maneuver like that, bringing the sail about, or setting sail, um, we always need to be asking ourselves, why are we doing it? And because each decision that we make, and again, there's different mechanisms that different humans use to make decisions. Some are more rooted in thought, some are more rooted in feeling. If we're more rooted in thought, we may have a good thought and be able to explain to ourselves why something makes sense for us to do or to want to do in a particular situation. But we need to uncover if there's a feeling underneath there that is that thought is resting on, because that feeling thought idea is that they sit on a relationship wheel. At the same time, if your motivations are rooted in feeling, uh, it sort of cautions us to subject those feelings to the scrutiny of certain degrees of thought, to sort of check what's going on there. So as long as the movement, and see, the reason that I'm saying this is because some people seek well-being by just sitting on the couch and eating. And the more they eat, the more sense of well-being they get. Well, that's clearly something that needs to be unfolded,
Do they?
right? Well, I think that's where their relationship with what and you can see how this is a what goes in, what goes out, where the boundary of self and outside, the traffic, transactional, energetic and material between the two. Um,
I guess the issue is
so I
if
guess what
they
I'm
think it's a sense of well-being, then subjectively it's a sense of well-being, and if I'm sitting outside of that saying, "Kind of looks like you hate yourself," then
well, from the outside, and that's
yeah.
why I guess I'm saying that the definition of well-being it has to be explored, and that's why my impulse is to go more towards a term like balance. And the Taoists are famous for saying things like, do your work and then retire. Don't try to be first in the world. Uh, but sort of like be of service. Don't be over the top with egotism sort of, and with an idea that there's a sort of a balance there between in the exchanges between the inside and the outside. Uh, so what as long as your sensibilities about what well-being is, but remember, if somebody's really insecure, then their definition of well-being might be extremely neurotic. So there might be never enough to feel really secure, and the type of security that generates the type of well-being may be unattainable in certain neurotic conditions. In which case, the adjustment isn't on the outside; it's on the inside, right?
I've been trying to think about, like, what do I mean by a sense of well-being, and I think I think it's really hard to define, but the best I've got so far is the sense that everything is more or less okay. I'm more or less okay, and I think what one could easily, uh, I'm thinking of The Big Lebowski now. Like, the dude abides. That's not necessarily the everything is more or less okay vibe that I'm imagining, but maybe that's the problem that you're describing. Is that
Well, and what I'm describing is that for some people, based on how the ball comes off the bat, it's actually a dispositional achievement for that definition of okay, everything's okay, to be okay. Uh, because some people, as I just rifled through the database in my head, some people uh, they definitely only feel okay if they feel that they are seen as superior to everyone else. Uh, or some people only feel okay if their presence puts everybody else on their back foot. Uh, some people only feel okay if they're hardly seen at all. Uh, I mean, you can imagine all the different ways that I can come up with to where things just being some people don't feel okay unless there's a big drama going on that is like a a firestorm that's sucking up everybody's attention. Uh, thinking of some novellas. Uh, so I suppose one really has to, and this is always a good exercise, is to explore what is okay. What is that place uh, where everything feels supportive and with the right degree of challenge and not, because we don't want to create ratopia either. Um, so, that's the problem.
what was that reference? Ratopia?
Where the guy creates the perfect rat environment that's good up to about 6,000 rats, and then he just lets the rats go nuts in there, and he finds out that they reproduce, and before they hit the capacity of Rattopia, they their civilization peaks out until and then it basically crashes. But as it does that, you get the rats that just groom all day, you get the rats that, become obese, you get the rats that become violent and terroristic,
Huh.
and it's been reproduced a number of times, and it always happens. And we would love to just walk away from those experiments, say, "Yeah, boy, do rats really suck." Except there are some disturbing parallels that we can't escape drawing
Hard to
the
ignore.
conclusion. Turns darn the luck, But so there's this idea that, we need to have a certain amount. And I think this again is part of the the premise of the Unabomber's manifesto, that we need a certain amount of challenge. We need to sort of have our reach exceed our grasp. If everything's too easy, then we just sort of lose our capacities and we sort of dull and glaze over. And then, as much as that seems like that would be the universal state, they're just going to stay on the sofa and do bong hits and watch Beavis and Butthead. What could go wrong? Well, it turns out that after a certain series of episodes of the aforementioned, yeah, you say, okay, we need something different. And
Hopefully, yeah.
a certain percentage of the humans have some innate capacity that wants expression beyond just stumbling to the kitchen for a cheese sandwich and then back to the sofa for the next episode. Um,
Yeah, I guess there's something sort of Spinoza-esque in this topic about like discovering true nature and that, well-being, joy, ecstasy might all be connected to kind of like the expression of the authentic self somehow, which is alignment with nature. And what you were just saying about finding some greater um avenue for expression beyond sitting on the couch ripping tubes and watching Beavis and Butthead. That's what Spinoza was talking about, right?
well, and I think that, yeah, I don't know that what Spinoza would say about Beavis, but um, he might share some of his existential dilemma. um, I guess this gets into that. Do we live meaning? Do we discover meaning? Are we an expression of the universe's meaning? Um, I mean, I guess I halfway want to make the argument that we have an entelechy and we want to fulfill it like the acorn wants to be an oak tree.
Yeah, I guess I'm proposing that if we embody the right answer to that question, which may be, all three of the options that you gave in some sense, but if we're embodying that, then we're more likely to have some sustaining sense of well-being than if we don't even ask ourselves that question.
Well, I think so. I think so. And I think that it is a it adds dimensionality to live in such a way as to be unfolding that question. I think this kind of dovetails back into the idea of being as many people as you can be and spreading out over the territory, as it were, unfolding as many petals with the likelihood that then the kind of flower that you are will become recognizable to you. And maybe one or two petals isn't enough. Some orchids have a lot of working parts.
Hmm.
Um, but that all of that becomes an element or an aspect of being as a lived dispositional element, as opposed to having a lot of clever propositions in your head that line up with things in a way that lets you make predictions, which is a slightly different picture. So you could see if every human is a slightly different meaning making machine, and joy exists somewhere on that scale of evaluation when we get into those internal functions of assigning value, uh, then joy sort of rests on the experience of meaning.
Mhm.
And it becomes quite unique. Some people find it in sitting in the front row at the orchestra. In other people, it's sitting in the first rows of the Sex Pistols concert. I'm trying to pick a jarring contrast,
Yeah,
or a
funny that because
Lawrence
those
Welk
seem
rerun.
categorically similar to me. Um,
Yeah. Well,
but
yeah.
but I mean, earlier we were kind of dancing around whether there's or we were, I think, agreeing, maybe without saying it explicitly, that there's a hierarchy um, of meaning amongst those experiences. So people individually deriving meaning and joy from particular experiences um, doesn't mean any experience from which joy can be derived is of equal merit on the meaning delivery scale. And I know that's like a really arrogant position, but
I
I'm
think Aristotle made the case first, in his ethics and how do we find the good life. And he runs through some of the things some of the wooden nickels we might mistake for the good life. And he
Mhm.
goes through all the obvious ones: wealth, power, physical pleasure, uh, and he makes pretty good arguments. Nicomachean ethics, folks. If you're in question, save yourself a lot of money, a lot of time, a few bodily organs. Uh, and Aristotle, he did all the work for you, and somebody did half the work of translating it out of Greek. So get you some Nicomachean ethics. Nicomachus or Nicomachus was Aristotle's son. So this was his counsel to his son.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Huh.
because there's another ethics. There's a second ethics. I don't recall the details. The one that seems to get all the press is the Nicomachean ethics.
Hmm. Well, is there something to be said about that? Um, so, I'm still thinking about that the hierarchy, right? And back
Hmm.
to that question of bringing joy to difficult times. Maybe being a particularly difficult thing to do and a particularly meaningful thing to do, at least in some traditions. And as
Yeah.
I was thinking about that during this conversation, one of the examples that came to mind is in quite a few ceremonies, and in one in particular that I'm thinking of that you and I did together during my kind of early days, like in my first 20 or 30, where it was just a very difficult ceremony. Everybody seemed to be having a pretty hard and dark time. And there's one Ikaro that you sang that you had learned from Jorge and um, about the house of the heart, and it's just like a simple melody. It's one of the few Ikaros that consistently gets a harmony overlaid on it, and it was beautiful, and everybody who had who who could that had been suffering most of the night um, joined in, and I think for the most part, found it to be quite a beautiful moment. Um, and that was like a very literal experience of finding a way to experience joy and I mean humanness and embodiment of humanness in a really difficult situation. So yeah, I think there's a relationship between that and this topic of hierarchy.
Well, and that's related also to the fact that joy is a feeling. It's not a thought. We can have thoughts about joy, but we experience it as a feeling. And that's why, to use an Ikaro is really kinda cheating because, an Ikaro moves directly to feeling. And so, uh, an Ikaro can identify a feeling, pull it out of the background, as it were, unfold it, and antidote it all uh, with a melody and with some helpers in there, and with there's something orchestrated about it, absolutely. But these things that are orchestrated are only enhancements or encouragements of a natural organic development that might be just encouraged to happen a little faster, a little.
I don't think I've heard you or anyone say what you just said about Ikaros and feelings before. Um, and this is into very tricky territory because uh, I think anybody would have a little bit of a different understanding of how Ikaros work, if that's even a legitimate question. Um,
Mhm,
but but that they go straight to feeling. I would have said that they go straight to the psychic plane, which maybe is decidedly not feeling, but has all of the connections to feeling, just like it has all the connections to thoughts, etc. But on the psychic plane, there's like I don't know patterns that thoughts and feelings play a part in, and I think of Ikado as kind of
mhm,
working at that level. So of course they're gonna, you know, sometimes it will be about feelings and sometimes it will be about thoughts and sometimes it will be about symbols and so that like but tell me more
mhm.
about kind of your mental model for that because that was really interesting and I like looking at it that way that that feeling within the psychic plane is what um both uh negativity and the unwinding and antidoting of negativity play on. Is that your take? That it's all the feeling living in the psychic plane. The symbols don't matter, the go ahead.
Yeah, I think it is about the feeling. The feeling is probably what is making the right golf club jump out of the bag. And that's why it looks like, the golf club just jumps out of the bag, because we're looking at it from standing on the leg of thinking instead of feeling. In other words, something, and again, the medicine and the helpers and what I feel typically in ceremonies is people showing up with unresolved feelings, not so much unresolved thoughts. The unresolved thoughts seem to rest on top of the unresolved feelings. And it seems that one fundamentally sings to those feelings. And that when you've touched those, then the way that you communicate to those is with antidotal feelings. So feelings that make a little adjustment that bring in a balance or bring in a little light or
Open the window. Yeah.
bring in some proportion or bring in a a re a new perspective on that, take the thing and set it in an entirely new context. And those are all different ways that that can work. Sometimes some Icaros show you the way out of those unresolved feelings, almost as an emotional formula of how you gather yourself up and you put the put yourself together and get her done, as we say. And
I've I I've for sure had those experiences. I just never thought of feelings as the common denominator across of all of them, and as the thing that makes the right golf club jump out of the bag. I thought that was more of like a provenance, if that's the right word, or providence, like like there's a relationship between the golf clubs and what's happening that's beyond my understanding. Um, and and I'm cool with that.
it's just beyond verbal understanding. Some understanding happens in feeling, and knowing that comes from feeling always looks like it's magic from the seat of reason. But it's just immediate. That's why it's just on a immediate feeling knowledge base, and it's not syllogistic. So the emissary can't run the program that the master runs. That's why the emissary needs to follow the master. But the master's knowledge is immediate and holistic, and and that's the way feeling is. Feeling tells you what it is. Feeling is what it is, in a dimensional way that a thought about it is once removed, so you can hold it up and look at it. But feeling it sits on a polarity with thinking. The more in the feels it is, the harder it is to think it without doing one of those. I always love that song from David Bowie on Changes, where he says, "So I turned myself to face me, but I never caught a glimpse of how the others must see the faker. I'm much too fast to take that test." And it's sort of like thinking needs to try to turn on itself fast enough to catch. It just can't do it. It just can't do it. Feeling is working on a different level, and
Mhm.
so the thinking's never going to catch feeling and how feeling does its math problems. Feeling won't show its work on the page, um, at least not to the satisfaction of that thinking hemisphere. If it does or it tries, it'll look like Finnegan's Wake. It's not that there's no meaning there, and it's not that there's no v- relationship and values and connections and milieus, and there's all that in there. It's just swims together in a different way than in the light of day, where we can pull out easy syllogisms, and we can't answer the same kind of whys, but we can know some things that we shouldn't be able to know for the same reason, by the light of linguistic reason in that other sphere. So
Mhm.
that's how I explained some of it to myself from the daylight room.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, you know, um,
Yeah, it's
but
a fun
no,
idea.
it's a
The
curious question.
Yeah, I tend to think of feelings as more like energetic, um, byproducts of experience. And so in this context, And of course, unresolved feelings are a huge factor in kind of therapy in general, right? Um, uh,
Well, unresolved feelings are mental thought forms that are connected, packaged with a certain energy. And that energy has to live somewhere as long as it's all unresolved. And it's
uh-huh.
gonna, in Reichian therapy, we would say that's gonna lodge somewhere in the body. It's gonna be a form of energy folded back on itself instead of moving through. And, so yeah, that's the way it shows up, and the medicine wants all the energy to move, so anything that's sort of, pushing back against it sort of shows up by contrast, um, you know?
Yeah. And again, I mean, it's interesting to me that it's the unresolved feeling that um, that shows up as the fundamental part. Say, for example, compared to the energetic folding back on it on self. Um, Not that they're unrelated, right? They're kind of um, in some sense different ways of describing the same dynamic. Although I like how
Well,
you're
they are the same
stacking
thing,
them.
sure. Although feeling isn't always just that. That's just sort of when it turns into this unresolved energetic knot. But feeling as a medium, as a dimension of mind, which is only inadequately captured by language, in ceremonies, there are places, there are environments that are entire feelings, and the feelings behind them I know are much bigger than me. And I know they're really old, and they come with snapshots of places that I've never been. But those snapshots are just images of entire feelings that can only exist because of a lot of human lives that lived and held those feelings and charged that place up with those feelings. In the same way, you might imagine that if there's a place in an old Catholic church where all the old ladies go to pray, in the corner where for now 800 years people have come to this place, and or the Wailing Wall, where everybody's come to this and done this, or the Ganges, where people have always come. It builds up a time body, and it might actually come to energetically facilitate that process because of that charge that goes with the place. And that's all exists on a dimension of feeling. It's very difficult to explain that. Um,
Mhm.
you know, um,
Cool. Well, yeah, I don't know if I feel a whole lot clearer about joy, but I really enjoyed the insights that resulted around like the roles of feelings in the therapeutic process and some new insights for me. Thanks for that.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Um, cool. Well, I'll leave it there for now, huh?
Till next time.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Take care.
Yep. Bye bye.